Open the door!
Nosferatu, The Wrath of Malachi is an FPS horror shooter and perfect as we're heading into spooky season. You are James Patterson, an Olympic fencer visiting his sister's wedding in Transylvania at Castle Malachi. Upon arrival, you see crucifixes nailed to the entrance, and your family's member's luggage is there missing. Your family's been kidnapped, sacrificed to the vampires who live in the castle, and your objective is to save them whilst dispatching holy retribution to the denizens. It's a weird cross between a boomer shooter and an escort game. I find parts of it really similar to Dead Rising, where you're blasting through a randomly generated castle, rescuing your family members and escorting them back to a safe room. You have a variety of weapons at your disposal, starting with your trusty cane sword and working your way up to a full max gun. As you rescue family members, they can give you buffs or new tools to assist your progress, and the actual scaling of the game changes very quickly, and it's quite good. Something that's almost not stated is that you're on a bit of a timer overall, but also for individual family members, with an in-game clock that gears to certain characters' deaths or buffs for the vampires in the castle. It's very alike Dead Rising there as well. The game seems to take influence from Dracula, Nosferatu, and the vampire, and isn't really based on any of the above, but you're like a Belmont with a bigger arsenal. That's the setup for the game. Gameplay, as stated before, includes traipsing around a castle, escorting and rescuing family members. The castle is randomly generated, but with 3 distinct areas: an east wing, a west wing, and a castle wing. Enemies vary from human thralls to vicious types of vampire, bat, or even spooky spirit, with spirits specifically requiring a crucifix to fight against. The game's pretty good at throwing enemies at you too, with corpses waking up or enemies smashing through ceilings, floors and windows. They try to keep you on your toes quite a lot. There's a stamina system for running and melee attacks, which is really more of a hindrance than anything else. And there's a few different boss encounters in set areas of the castle, which were a bit of variation, but they're kind of lacking. Really, there's not too much to look at. It's a simple game, and while slightly janky, knows what it wants to achieve. I found it quite hard to start with, and then as soon as I started getting guns, it got exceptionally easy. Family members will follow you as soon as you encounter or free them, and you can command them to stay still if you need them to. There's not too much negative to leading them around with you, besides the off chance of one of them glitching through the walls or catching a stray hit. I haven't tried to daisy chain them, but at one point I had 2 or 3 people follow me at once, and nothing bad really happened. New enemies could appear in previous rooms too, so sometimes it's better to drag a load of people on one trip instead of many different trips, just to save resources. In terms of graphics and sound design, the game came out in 2003, so just bear that in mind. The graphics suit with fairly simple designs that showcase the castle and not really differentiating the areas too much. The models are what you'd expect from the time and texture work too, but it's still good enough to elicit scares out of you. There's various music tracks that play in the background that are spooky, with audio stingers that are likely there to try and scramble you. The monsters look monstrous, and the different family members do stand out, and a few of the models really stand out. Count Orlov himself looks pretty true to life and floats around looking scary as hell. Overall, it all works if you're only after a dab of immersion and some spooks. Some of the graphical choices in later areas are a bit naff when things get too dark to see, but there's not a whole lot of that in the early game. The modelling work reminds me of Vampire Bloodlines, and you could probably slap the model straight into that game and you wouldn't really notice. The voice acting ranges from really hammy to quite good, mostly in the hammy area, and I enjoyed the range of characters we got. It was good comedic relief.
I can't take it much longer. Please, bring Dr. Amersfield.
Go and find the others. Here's a little something for that wound. Come back here if you're wounded, and I'll help you with the wounds.
Now, there's not too much story to go on here, it's just not that sort of game. So instead we're going to talk about where all the family members were found, how much fun I had getting to them, and I guess you could say spoilers from here. So there's 17 family members, well, 16 and 1 dog. Most, if not all of these, have a death time either tied to a certain time in game or a set amount of time from when you first enter their zone. For each relative that dies, the final boss gets a buff to their health and damage, and if a total of 6 die, the game ends prematurely. James is gripped with depression from his family members' deaths. If any die off screen, you do get notified, but really we can try and save them all. In my run, I think I saved everyone bar 1. Father Avil's the family priest, and he should be the first one you encounter, as he's by the first unlocked zone. He actually makes a stunning entrance.
I can't take it much.
And when we see him, he gives us one of our most potent weapons, the crucifix, which can keep enemies back and damage ghosts, and it's a good, get out of jail free card. He'll bleed out in 30 minutes if we can't find the Doctor within the East Wing and get the Doctor to him. If you do manage to save him, he gives you a chalice which can one-shot most supernatural enemies, so it's worth trying to find the Doctor ASAP. Dr. Amsfield will be found somewhere in the East Wing, and it's completely randomised with his placement, and that's similar to a lot of the family members. Once you find him, you should beeline back to the Sanctuary when you can get him, as both he and the priest have some nutty rewards. Amsfield will heal you to full health whenever you interact with him at home base, making him invaluable given the random nature of the loot and the enemies. Emile and Andrew Kingston are your aunt and her husband, and both again are found in the East Wing somewhere random. They actually share a suitcase, so if you only get one of them, that's okay. They give you access to the revolver, which can revolutionise your combat. At this point in the game, you'll have probably looted musket shots and flintlocks for enemies, but the revolver can put most things down in a couple of hits without having a silly reload. The amount of ammo you can find for it too will change your life, as the game puts you on the front foot. Sophie, our other aunt, is where things pick up, as she's gated behind the game's first boss, Desmodali. Go through the garrison, find a key to the East Tower, and head on up, avoiding shots from musket men as they can take you down a couple of hits at ease. Sophie's trapped in a cage that we need to get to the top of the tower to lower. While each wing of the castle is randomised, certain sections aren't, or are semi-randomised. So for instance, there'll always be a garrison, there'll always be an East Tower, but the rooms inside might be slightly different from playthrough to playthrough. And we need to get to the top of the tower to lower her cage. When we reach the top, we can see a nice dated cutscene from the time. Now there's 6 bosses in this game, and only one really stands out, and that's much later. The rest of them, the strat is just to douse them in holy water and they die. Like, instantly. It's really underwhelming. Like, just watch this. We need a key from his body, so you actually have to traverse the back end of the roof until you get to his coffin, and then stake him. I like that element. It made it feel a little bit more puzzly than it actually was, and actually having to go and deal the final blow. It slightly made up for how quick the fight was. I don't know how I feel about it, really. They still feel really weak, but there's this undercurrent of if I didn't get to them in time, they might get back up and fight me again. Killing him gives you a key to get your aunt out, and it opens up a new pathway in the East Wing. Her reward is a key to your dog's travel cage, and you can go and free it, and it will follow you around as a combatant. Or you just leave it safe in the courtyard like I did. I was really anxious of letting any family member die, as I am in these sort of games. This one was no different. I didn't want anyone to die. The last relative of the East Wing is Gregory Bidwell. He's your best friend, and is also gated behind a boss. He's at the top of the garrison. With a key you would have found earlier, you climb to the top of the garrison, out of another roof to find another hammy cutscene. There's a few nuances with this fight that might ruin your run. Weirdly, on rooftop areas there are these bat enemies that can knock things out of your hands. And in my run, I lost my one-shot killer. Like, it knocked it out of my hand and just fell to the abyss. The physics could also be your arch enemy. Like, his both falls to my doom after this one boss. Gregory will try and fight any enemy you come across, and they tend to aggro on you, but you can heal and he can't, so it's best to just take him back. He gives you a shitload of revolver ammo, and one of the game's free potions, boosting your stamina for 6 minutes. We had just fought off Murray, Malachi's concubine, and she flew off to a coffin at the bottom of the garrison. So you take the priest's magic scroll from where you beat her first, and meet her down there. With her death comes the West Wing key, and an item needed for area number 2. The East Wing was full of these long corridors and rooms that I could only deem as storage. So let's look at where the other half of the family is, in the West Wing. The West Wing is full of bedrooms and libraries, and the layout is different enough from the East Wing to know where you are. It's centred around a big staircase with 5 floors, and each floor loops around the central staircase, making it possibly the easiest to navigate. You go in one door, you come out back at the staircase. It's just the keys for the floors that are locked are distributed amongst the various floors. Mrs. Patterson is your mother, and probably the first you'll see here. She's somewhere on the first floor, and I don't think she has a death timer. When you save her, you get a bundle of garlic, which has a similar effect to the crucifix. It's just active all the time for the next 6 minutes. Next, I found the third boss, the Foul Beast. If you didn't look out with family members on the lower floors, you'll probably encounter him as well.
Hey y'all, it's Big Fat Reverend Bird here again!
The boss room's pretty ominous, as this giant mass of sewn flesh crawls out of the tunnels we've just dropped in. Now there's these tunnels you can hide in to duck and weave, or you could just, splash in with that McDonald's Sprite we can infinitely produce from any water pool. He's got the 5th floor key, and it was at this point I also started to encounter new enemies, including vampire bats and these faster, lesser vampires, and it was a nice bit for variety. I'd also ran out of revolver ammo, so my whole just spamming the revolver in the East Wing did come back to bite me, so I just started splashing everything. I then found boss number 4, Dryja, before I found anyone else. Dryja is actively guarding Wilfred Patterson, your brother, and the fight's quite challenging, well, like the room is anyway. You hit her with a quick splash and she dies, but you'll notice there's a giant portal in the room spitting out these lesser vampires en masse. There's smaller versions of these dotted around other parts of the castle, and it's very easy to get outnumbered and overwhelmed, because they just pump them out infinitely. Smash this thing or they'll keep spawning. Your brother's like Greg, where he'll fight for you, but if you get him home, he gives you a haste potion, which puts the game on crack. At this point, I also found Frank Patterson. He could be anywhere in the West Wing, but he was on one of the locked floors for me. He gives you the machine gun, which trivialises the game more than the chalice does. This thing, I don't think I ever ran out of ammo for. It's got a 30-round clip and takes most enemies out in 3 to 6 bullets.
If it's Russia again, they have got something very special.
Whatever happens, we have the Maxim gun, and they have not. Why he took a machine gun to a wedding, I have no clue, but it works for us. Like, watch this, while I'm still under haste, I felt like Blade for a solid 5 minutes. Mortimer Patterson, our other uncle, is anywhere on the 2nd level of the West Wing, and he gives us a vest that reduces damage by 30%. And this thing looks old school. We can find the key to the castle proper on the corpse of the vampire we downed earlier, which could take us to the next zone. But before then, we have a couple of loose ends in the West Wing, including our sister Angelica, who can be anywhere and gives us garlic, and Manfred, an acolyte of the priest who can give us this chalice if we didn't get it earlier, and he's on the final floor of the West Wing. There's also a family medium called Melissa who I couldn't find. She has an 18-minute death timer, which makes her the hardest one to save. Because you can get really unlucky with her placement. She can be on the top floor and you just won't get to her in time. This leaves us with 3 relatives left, and they're all in the castle proper. So the castle splits into various floors, with a portal at the top on the lowest level. If you save all your relatives, time will skip ahead closer to dawn, where you can fight a penultimate boss. If not, it will stay early evening. Now, the castle's very dark, with these horrible shadow effects that block a lot of your vision. They're also chock full of gargoyles too, which I think are the strongest enemy we can face. Of course, with the machine gun, none of this is really an issue. Lord Belmore, our family lawyer, can be anywhere in the castle, and gives us access to any unopened family trunks. He dies in 20 minutes if you don't get through the castle quick enough, and he even threatens to sue us if we don't get him out, which got a restrained chuckle from me. Our father is also somewhere in the castle and has a 25-minute timer, and he shares a case with Mumsy, so we've probably already got his reward in 9 out of 10 playthroughs. Things get really interesting when we try to find our sister on the top floor of the castle. It has to be close to dawn, as we need to use these mechanisms to open the cathedral she's housed in. Then we get to see a famous face. Count Orlok kills our sister in a cutscene, and he's impervious to our weapons, even our cross. His model's exceptional for the time, and he was very creepy for the 30 seconds he was on screen. You have to hit 3 switches in his room to let sunlight flood into the centre, and from there you can just lure him into it and he dies. Under the cathedral is the final boss of the game, Malachi himself, and I can't tell if he's a vampire or a demon or something in between, but we have another hammy intro. You have to shoot the glowing orb at his centre to deal damage to him. I think you can also lead him into the sunlight column. Whenever you get that little sparkle effect, you've done damage to him. I've heard the holy water trivialises him, but I just couldn't make it land at all. The machine gun works though, as this is just a big shooting fest. If you've let more family members die, I can imagine it's a much harder fight, but with his death we get an outro cutscene.
As the evil Malachi falls defeated, you are overcome with emotion. Your sister is dead, but the world is saved from an evil greater than you could ever have imagined. Although you may not appreciate it now, you have fought and won as a true hero.
So, what did I think? In conclusion, the game's fun. It might be a bit janky even for an old game, physics being your worst enemy. I liked the random nature of the castle. I actually enjoyed escorting the family members. It scratched some OCD part of my brain. You feel like an absolute warrior by the time you get guns though. I felt the look and the feel of the game were there. It was spooky and jumpy and a good little time waster. I wish they'd balanced a bit better though, with your first few rooms being a bit of a hassle, and then the game just becoming super easy from the middle onwards. The chalice insta-killing most bosses definitely took away from the game for me. Perhaps if it was a limited resource it would have been better, but currently you just re-bless any pool that you've been to and you can refill it. It doesn't ever run out. If it was limited use, maybe this could have alleviated it, but there were still pools everywhere. It wasn't hard to use the chalice. A standout for me was the fight with Count Orlok, and that was just done really well. The model looked about as realistic as you can get. Malachi himself was a bit of a letdown, with not a whole lot of build-up either, but at least he had a health bar. Maybe if they'd cooked it in as a second phase to Orlok, I don't know. The game's from 2003 and it's like £2 on Steam, so get it, it's good fun. And it's actually cheaper than bottled water in most places. Overall, 6 out of 10. Over and out, Smooth Brains.
James!
I've fallen and I can't get up.